At the end of a meeting or a presentation, it's often good to offer your audience the opportunity to ask questions, and then you can answer them. You can do this with the chat pod by simply having people type into the chat pod, but there's a specific pod that has some functionality that I want to show you that's a little better for doing that. So what I'm going to do is create a new layout for Q&A, and we'll start by duplicating this layout because it's going to be almost exactly the same as this layout. So we'll duplicate wrap-up, and we'll call it Q&A. Click OK. And it doesn't look like anything has changed, again, because it's exactly a duplicate of the previous layout. But in this case, I'm going to get rid of the chat pod. And I'm actually going to get rid of this headshot. First, I'm going to put the attendee pod up, because I want you to see that I have another host in the room with me, and that's Olivia. And Olivia's in the room because at the end of this session, she's our web expert. If questions come up that she can answer, well, then I'm going to have her help me with the Q&A. So to get started with the Q&A, I'm going to select from my pods menu, the Q&A pod. Now, the Q&A pod works very much like a chat pod, except that it has some additional functionality. When someone types a question into the Q&A pod, there are tools that I can use to manage those questions more effectively. So you can see that Nick has asked, what is the timeline for the new site to go live? If I click on that question, I can answer it, but it occurs to me that I probably don't know the answer as well as Olivia does. So what I'm going to do is assign this to Olivia. Now, Olivia in her pod is going to see that the question's been assigned to her. She can go ahead and answer it. And I can see that the question's there, Olivia has answered it, and we're good to go. Now, Nick has asked another question that I think is probably appropriate for me. However, I'm not really interested in exposing this question to my entire audience because I don't want people to think that the site wouldn't be 100% complete, but the answer is that, yeah, it'll only be about 95. So when I select this question and I'm ready to answer it, instead of sending it back to everybody so that everybody can see it, I'm going to respond privately back to Nick. And so instead of clicking this button here, I'm going to click Send Privately. Now, there's no way to tell that it was sent privately here. So what I'm going to do is click over to Participant View. And what I'm seeing here is the list of questions and answers that everybody can see. So Nick asked about the timeline, Olivia answered Nick, and everybody can see the question and the answer. The question from Nick about the percentage completeness of the website isn't listed here because that's a private question. Nick can see it, I can see it, but nobody else can. Now, at the end of the process, you may have a lot of questions in the queue, especially in a meeting where you have lots of participants. So you can actually sort the questions, only looking at the open questions, only looking at questions that are answered, or only looking at questions that have been assigned specifically to me. The Q&A pod is a really useful tool for Q&A because it goes beyond the chat pod in allowing you to manage the questions and allowing you to make your question answer process private to those people for whom it's appropriate. At the end, of course, you may want to take these questions offline and work with them. So from the pod options menu, you can always export the entire Q&A log as an RTF file or email it to yourself as an email with the text in the body of the email. So any meeting where you're going to allow the audience to ask questions is a meeting in which you'll probably have a layout at the end for Q&A. And if you do, use the Q&A pod for it, and you'll find that it's a much easier and more efficient process.